I just said I'm more about the pie than the ice cream.
Okay, well, I didn't know if you wanted one.
I do, but I'm just saying. Okay. So it's early October 2017, and these are just some of the stories. I'll probably think of more stuff later, but these are just some of the stuff that I've come up with over the last couple days that are stories that some of you may have heard and some of you may not have heard about just different things that have happened in my life. And I hope they mean something to you. They do to me. And I think all of them, in some way or shape or form, made me who I am. So I'm going to start off with a series of stories about my first jobs. When I first started working, I couldn't afford a car, and I got a job working for a lady, and I apologize, but I don't remember anymore the name of the place or anything. It was near the Naval Training Center in Orlando, whatever that main street was that went into the main gate. Horatio is what keeps coming in my head, but I don't think that's correct.
That's right.
But at any rate, it was a storefront operation that made what was called greenware. Greenware is something that you use in ceramics. It's the very first step. And what you do, and I learned all this just by working for this lady and her telling me what to do. And she was at times a little bit of a tyrant because she had not a very big shop and she had a lot of stuff to get done. And she couldn't do it herself, and she had hired several people before me, and they would just cause all kinds of problems. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about pouring greenware and some of the things that I figured out about it. And that it's just stuff you pick up, right? So at any rate, what you do when you pour greenware is that there are molds made out of plaster. And they're made by all different companies, all different quality, all different ways that they go together. And you put them together with great big red rubber bands. And so one of the things that you had to do before you started what I referred to as a pour is you had to actually figure out everything that she wanted or needed for the store, and then figure out which pieces you're going to pour by their size. And this is more of an art than a science, because literally what you're doing is you have a big table that's probably somewhere, I think, in the neighborhood of about 12 feet long, and underneath it has a fiberglass series of trays that come in like an angle and then go down to a central bin. And that central bin is where you pour what is called slip. And slip is liquid clay, pure and simple. It came in square boxes about that big. They weighed about 25 or 30 pounds. They're real heavy because it's wet clay. And you open the box and fold the plastic down and then dump it in. And it is a liquid slurry. It's not solid. And so what you did is you then picked all these molds out, set them in the order that you're going to pour them, and it had a motor on it and a handle like a gas pump. Sorry for all of those who don't know what gas pumps are anymore, because you have electric cars in the future. But basically it was just a handle with a nozzle on it, and you poured into the greenware this slip product until it got to the top of the section. or the top of the piece of the top of the mold. And so you just went through the whole thing. And the trick was, you only want the greenware to get about somewhere between a 1/16 of an inch and a 1/4 of an inch, depending on how big the piece was. But if you let it get too thick, then the piece would collapse when you took it out of the mold. So basically what you had to do is go through and pour this stuff and then watch it thicken around the opening. You know, we had these little wood tools that we would use to pry it up to see how thick it was. And then you go through and dump them out. And you wanted to dump it all out and get as much of the liquid as you could possibly get out of it out, because you could use it for something else on the next piece. And then you'd let them sit on the table. And I'm talking about probably doing something on the order of 40 to 50 pieces at a time. And it was all kinds of things, from Mickey Mouses and Donald Ducks and Goofies to Christmas trees of all different kinds, and just anything you could think of, plates. And then of course occasionally somebody would want to pour porcelain, and it worked the same way, but porcelain was white, very, very fine clay, enormously fine. And it was really hard to pour because it would dry so fast that you really could only do it a couple pieces at a time. You couldn't do a whole bunch. So I was 15. I was not old enough to have an actual work permit. I shouldn't have been working there. I was working getting my money under the table. And every night I would walk over to the Sobix restaurant, which was across the street, and they made submarine sandwiches. And they made these steak sandwiches, and I'd get the same. You guys probably have figured out by now I'm quite the creature of habit. I would go in there and get the same sandwich every single night with peppers every single night, and go back and eat every single day. So I would work until about 9 o'clock at night, and then my mom would come and pick me up. But part of the story was, once you poured it, then you had to prepare it. So then you got to take it apart. You have to take the rubber bands off, and you have to learn how to take the outside pieces off so that you don't tear it up. And you have to be really careful. You got to cut the lip around it so it's smooth when you set it on stuff. And we would set it onto shelves that had wood. Had to be wood shelves, so they would actually absorb the water out of the bottom of it quicker, and then they would dry in the air. As you can imagine, in Florida, drying in the air sometimes took a while. And there were some truly beautiful Christmas trees that had amazing detail. But if you slipped, moved, made any kind of mistake taking those things apart, it would leave gouges in it. And the only thing you could do with it, you really can't sell it, you'd have to break it up and throw it back into the slip machine, and it would churn that clay back up again. Every once in a while I'd have to add water to it just to keep things smooth. But I got pretty good at it, and I got to where I was doing quite a bit. More than she thought could be done by anybody. She could never do that much. And I'm not trying to tout my horn. I was just young. I was 15. I could move faster than she could. She was crippled. She had a bad knee. So I was just able to do more. But as I was making this stuff, she started selling it to other stores, other greenware shops. And so she was making more and more money. I was getting busier and busier, but I was having a blast. I enjoyed doing it. It was a job where nobody, other than her telling me what to do, as far as what things, other than get mad at me when I broke stuff, she really left me alone. She let me do my own thing. Well, there's a couple other little things that you have to do over time after the customers take the greenware and put the glaze on it and everything else. One of the things you have to do is fire it. And so there were, in the same room with me, were 3 very large kilns. And so I'd have to set all the furniture up in a kiln. And what that means is you have to take these big octagonal pieces of very heavy ceramic and set up posts of various heights so that all the different pieces you had inside the kiln, you could adjust the heights. I mean, you could be this high, or it could be this, this high. And if you're really daring, you could stack things on top of each other. And I got very good at that, and generally didn't have the thing cave in on itself. That would be bad, but I never really had that happen. And then she had one tiny little kiln that was for firing gold. And over the period of time that I worked with her, when I was 15, going on 16, I didn't realize it, but I eventually lost most of my sense of smell from firing gold. It just destroys your sense of... I can smell stuff, but I never was able to smell really well because of that. And I didn't ever put two and two together, and I never would have thought to sue her or anything. But it was... I had great fun, and I enjoyed doing it. And so Mom would, like I said, would drop me off and pick me up every day, and I was saving up my money. And eventually, Eric, Claire's husband, and I saved up enough money to buy a car, and he helped me find one. It was a early 60s Volkswagen Fastback, and that was my first car. And then Mom didn't have to drive me back and forth to work. However, by then I was 16 and got my driver's license. And so at any rate, I felt pretty independent. I didn't make a ton of money. Minimum wage at the time, if I'm not mistaken, was $1.75. And she was paying me under the table, so I was getting something on the order of $1.50. But for a kid in high school and I never had any trouble getting my homework done because I could do homework in between things, and it was a good job for a kid in high school. So as her business grew, she eventually bought or rented a big warehouse, or part of a big warehouse, on a road called Forsyth in Orlando. And it was on the east side of town, and this road ran from Aloma Avenue through the UCF Drive, University Drive, all the way down to Highway 50, and then a little bit past that. So, but it was about 2 traffic lights from 436, which was a main thoroughfare. But back in those days in Orlando, that area was very undeveloped. We're talking nothing but pine forest for the most part until you got to this warehouse. The only other thing between it and University Boulevard was the state inspection station. So, at any rate, she was looking for some more help. I suggested that she hire a friend of mine named Ski. Ski lived on our same street, down 2 houses. He is a very unusual young man in many, many ways. But he was always a good friend, and I felt like he could work with me and do a good job. And he did. So I taught him how to pour, and we were doing pretty good. And she decided that because this warehouse was out in the middle of nowhere, that it, in her mind too, that it probably wasn't a great idea to have 2 miners working in this warehouse at night until 9 or 10 o'clock at night without any supervision. So she actually hired a man who I don't remember his name any longer, but he had been in the military, and he kept trying to tell us how to do stuff. And in my inimitable way, I never ever told him no, but I almost never followed his directions because he'd never done greenware and he did not know how to do it. He knew how to manage things, and he was nice enough, but he didn't understand how you had to pour. He didn't get it. And eventually I was able to get him to understand after a couple weeks, and he stopped yelling at me quite so much. But and I'm not saying I was an artist or I knew better than anybody else. It's just one of those things. It's not typical. It's not. It depends. If it's about to rain, it takes a lot longer because the humidity is higher. If you're doing it in the heat of the afternoon, it's going to go real fast. But moving from her building that was just a regular store front, but had like 10-foot ceilings, her building was always really, really humid. And when we moved to this warehouse, now we had a warehouse that had a 35 or 40-foot ceiling, and it was the very last warehouse in the building. So it got cooked by the sun every afternoon, and I mean cooked. When we got there, it would be stiflingly hot. We'd open up all the big rolling doors and stuff and try to let it air out, and it had some huge fans. So it was bearable, but it was a different place than the other store, which was good because it allowed us to actually work a lot faster, because when we would get done with the molds at night and put them away in the store, you'd come back the next day and about half the time they were still too wet to pour. So you could probably most of the time only have to pour them every other day. Well, out at this place, you could pretty much pour them every day. And if the weather was right, you could sometimes pour them twice in a day. And so you guys are probably getting a little tired of where in the world is this story going. But where it went was this. I learned a lot. I learned about working with people who were my bosses, how to work with them without necessarily completely agreeing with them, but not being a jerk about it, but by showing them how it could be done. And I found that most of the time, if you weren't obnoxious or ugly to them, and you took the time to show them, most adults would listen. And that was an important life lesson. And it was hard for me because, sometimes the adults didn't want to listen. But I was able to get people to pay attention to me because I would always tell them the truth. And I would explain it, and I would show them. And it worked out. And after about this, we had worked with this guy for about 3 weeks. He gained quite a bit of respect from me, I think. He and I got along pretty good. Ski, however, just did not know how not to be obnoxious, and would, in his inimitable way, manage to make this guy mad just about every night. So normally what we did is about every hour or so we were allowed to take a smoke break. I didn't smoke. Ski did. So we would go outside and smoke. And in the little building we actually had a little break room. Nothing fancy. It had one of those little bitty refrigerators in it, and just a table and some chairs. And we went by on the way out to the smoke break, and the guy who was our supervisor, and I'm sorry that I don't remember his name, I feel bad. But anyway, he was sitting at the table like this. So we went outside and talked for about 10 minutes while Ski was smoking, and came back, and he was like that still. And normally he would, I'd never seen him sleep at work. And normally, within a few minutes of us coming back in, he'd start telling us what to do. What different things he wanted done. But he didn't, and that was weird. So, eventually, one of us, and I think it was Ski, went into the room and was kind of banging around in the break room, and he didn't move at all. And so, Ski tried to arouse him. And then he yelled for me to come in there, and he wasn't responding at all. He was breathing, but he was not, responding to us talking to him or anything else. So we called 911, and this was before there was really good technology. And this warehouse was way out on this road. And there was very, very, very little out there. I mean, literally nothing out there. No neighborhoods, no anything. There was maybe 3 or 4 other warehouses. And the county line, it turned out we didn't know, or the fire district line, we didn't realize was like right on the border of where this building was. And we didn't know what the physical address was. We just drove there and went to work. So, and we were just kids. We didn't think anything about it. So when I got on the phone with the 911 people, they told us they weren't sure where we were. And we said, that's fine. One of us will run down to Forsyth and stand there and wave the fire trucks down. And then we would show them where they were. I gotta tell all of you, it was the most surreal experience ever. While I was still on the phone, I could hear the fire engines at both ends of this road at the fire stations. I could hear them come on. They were different. They didn't sound exactly the same. And you could hear the diesel engines just pouring on the power. And I started to realize that this guy very likely could be dead, but I didn't know how to check his pulse or anything. I didn't know anything. So Ski was trying to, talk to him and talk to the lady from 911. And she was trying to get us to lay him out on the floor and do chest compressions, and Ski was working on that. But one of us had to run down to the end of the warehouse and all the way down the entrance road. And so I did that, and I ran all the way down to the end of the road. And you could see the lights. And you could hear the engines. And it was like forever. It just took forever because you realize somebody's life was hanging in the balance. And so they finally got there, and both fire departments came down the street because even they were not sure whose jurisdiction it was. And they let me in one of the fire trucks, and I told them which warehouse it was, which is pretty obvious. It was the only one that had any lights on. And they went in there, and the ambulance got there very shortly thereafter. And they were doing all kinds of stuff which I didn't understand, and they put him on a stretcher and took him to the hospital, and they told us which hospital they were taking him to, and it was a hospital I'd never heard of. It was near Highway 50 and the intersection of 436, back in the neighborhoods back in there. And so as soon as they took him away and we could lock everything up, we just shut everything. We had to finish unmolding everything because if you didn't, it would ruin the molds and everything else. So it took us a little while. We finished what we were doing, and then got in my car and we drove down to that hospital. And when we got there and asked about him, he was dead. And we had to call her and let her know, and she came down to the hospital. But that was the first time in my life I ever saw anybody die. And it was a very strange feeling because you felt like you'd done everything you could, but there was nothing you could do. He was probably dead sitting in the chair, most likely. But we didn't know any better. And Ski quit a couple days after that. He couldn't work there anymore. I kept working there, and they hired some other people. And I probably worked there for another year. And it always worried me that the old guys that she would hire to be the managers, that another one was going to die. And so whenever I went into the break room, I was always checking to make sure they weren't asleep or something. And it was a really weird experience. So it was one of those opportunities where I learned a lot about working on my own and working with other people. But it was also something that I had to deal with, a situation that was really far beyond being a 16-year-old kid having to deal with. But you just did what you thought was right. Everybody did what they could to save the guy, the fire departments, everybody. It was a sad, sad situation. But, it was just one of those things. And I think this was one of the things that was formative to my work life. So we'll kind of move on from that story to my mini mama.